Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Criterion Learning Series. We are going to be covering payroll year end, specifically for Canada. And right now, I don't have anybody else as a panelist to monitor the chat, so I'm going to do the best I can. I think I'm going to have at least one person joining that'll be able to monitor the Q&A in the chat. So in the meantime, oh, looks like Patrick's here. Perfect. So Patrick will be able to monitor the chat and the Q&A. So if you do have questions, please feel free to use that. Make sure that we answer your questions. If we're not able to answer it during the call today, what we'll do is follow up with you with the answers to your questions. So let's go ahead and get started here. So the very first thing we want to mention here is that if you do have any questions regarding the taxability of incomes or deductions, please consult an accountant, a tax advisor, tax consultant. Our support team, our implementation team, Criterion itself, we cannot provide tax advice in that manner. What we can do is once you have that guidance from the advisor or consultant, is we can help you set up the system based off of that advice. So if they tell you to tax a certain income or make a certain deduction pre-tax or something like that, we can help you with that configuration, but we will not advise you on how something should be taxed. And the information on the following slide is the latest data as of today. Earlier today, I have no idea if something has changed in the last several hours, but it's the latest data that I have. Of course, it is subject to change from the CRA. So if something happens between now and the end of the year, please keep on top of that. You can obviously go to their website and check that stuff out. And we will be doing this again in a few weeks. So possibly it will be different by then. I don't think anything's going to change. I don't believe they'll change anything now because it's so late in the year, but always keep an eye on that stuff and make sure you're monitoring if something changes out there. So first off, I want to mention some of the deduction limits and their changes from last year. So you can see the RPP plans, the deduction limit increased to $33,810. That's an increase of $1,320. RRSP plans, those changed to $32,490, which is an increase of $930. And DPSP plans, deduction limits have changed to $16,905. That's an increase of $660. And again, these possibly could change. So just keep an eye on those things to make sure that nothing does change. I don't believe this is like a preliminary thing. I believe that it should be set in stone, but always monitor those things. You're up to date. Right. And I double checked all these things as I was entering in my slideshow here, but if I do have any typos, again, you just go to the website and they have them listed there, and you can just triple check to make sure that they're correct. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and switch over to the system, and we can look at what we're going to be doing over here. All right, so you should be able to see my self-service now. And of course, most of what we're going to be doing is going to be in the admin side, because that's where you would set up things like deduction changes and holidays and all those things you're going to need to do for your next year of processing payroll and, of course, running reports and everything for 2024. So I already have these open here. I'm going to just go to settings first. So I've gone to my settings. I'm going to just kind of start at the top of the list here and move down. Things you will probably need to change. So the first thing that I could think of would be holidays. So you'll need to put in your holidays for 2025. And you can see I don't have any set up for 25 because I wanted to show how that would be done here. And you will need to do this. You can do one of two things. One is I should say one of three things. You could import. We have a template for importing in holidays, so you could use that if you'd like. You could create a new one by clicking add and then filling in all the information, or you could copy a previous year's and use the clone functionality and then just go and change the dates. And that's what I'm going to do, is to clone this. Right, so I'm going to just change the year here, 2025, and I'd put that in each one here. Okay, and do this. Of course, you may have multiple holidays out here for different groups of employees, in which case you would need to do that for your employees, employee groups up here. So you can see how I've done this right here. Of course, when I do this, it copies all of the holidays that I had previously set up. However, you may need to go and change the dates because obviously Friday, or March 29th of 24 may not be a Friday in 25. So you just go in here and you'd update it to, let's say, the 28th. All right. Of course, you could type it in if you need to. And if you want to change the description or something like that, of course, you can do those settings in here. No, I'm not going to go through every single holiday in here, but I think you get the idea of what you would do is just click on it and change the holiday. If you needed to add a new one, maybe there's a new thing you're going to be celebrating as a company, you can add right here. And let's say you needed to delete one for whatever reason, you could go in and delete it. Right. This will need to be set up before you can start doing timesheets for the year, because if you try to clock in, let's say January 1st is a holiday, you'll get a message that there's no holidays set up for the year. So make sure you check on that, make sure you have those holidays set up. And especially if you have multiple companies, you'll notice, I have this one set up, but you possibly could have one for different employers. So just double check all those things to make sure they're right. And you can always try this in your sandbox if you want to just double check and make sure everything's working for you. Right, let me go down here and we'll look at payroll administration. So I'm just going to kind of start at the top and move down. Deductions. So we talked about how the deductions have some changes in here. You could just go into the deduction and change the limit right in here. So you could type in 33,810 as the employee limit. And, of course, that would cascade down to the employees so that that's changed on the employees. So you'd want to change that limit in here. So if you did have the old limit, make sure you change it. Otherwise, as somebody approaches the maximum, it will, 32,490, let's say they're approaching it towards the end of the year, we want to make sure that it actually goes all the way out to the max that they can contribute. So make sure you update that deduction in there. You may have other deductions that are not, a tax related deduction. Maybe there's a uniform deduction or something like that, and you've increased it for the next year. Again, go through, double check those limits to make sure they're right. If you don't do it on the first payroll, you're probably going to be okay, because most people won't max them out on the first payroll, but you never know. Somebody might have a massive bonus and, contribute everything, and in which case it would stop. Same type of thing with any other tax related deduction. Maybe there's something and you need to change how that works. So make sure you check those limits in there on your deductions. Same thing could apply on incomes. There's also limits on their ceilings that you may need to do. So you can come in and, by select an income code, you might have a ceiling in one of these fields here, and maybe you're changing that for next year, annual ceiling, period ceiling, etc. Maybe you're changing those for next year. Just to go ahead and double check these to make sure that they're right for you. All right, so that's in there. Let's look at a little bit further down, and that's under payroll schedules. You will need to set up a payroll schedule for next year. Otherwise, you're going to have a hard time processing payroll because there's not going to be any pay periods to pay. So you'll want to go into your pay groups, whatever they are, or your payroll schedules, and make a new one for 25. So I'll go into this one I have here called weekly, and you'll see I've got 24 right here, and obviously some previous years. And the nice thing is that the system will go back and see how you're currently doing it and just continue on. So when I come down here, like 12/28 is the last date for my last pay period, technically, that is in 24. And it will use that as the start date for the first one for my 25. So when I come in here, I'm doing weekly, so I'm going to say 52. So if you're doing biweekly or something like that, you of course have to put the right number of periods. But you'll see it's picked up from 12/29 and then going forward. Now you may want to check these dates. Mine happen to be on a Thursday, so I don't think I have any holidays that are on there off the top of my head. But if there is, maybe your payday is a Friday or something like that, or maybe there is a holiday on Thursday. I don't know all the holidays, the dates of them off the top of my head, but you can change them here. So that way, when you go to run that payroll, you don't have to remember to change it at the time, especially, later in the year, you may forget if there's a holiday, towards the end of the year, maybe Christmas Day or something. Well, here you go, Christmas Eve. So maybe you move this up, in which case you can come in here and just change it, type it in, or select a date if you need to do that. You can, of course, do that when you're processing payroll. It's just one extra thing to remember. So, but you do definitely need to have that payroll schedule set up for the year, the 25 year, before you start running payroll. So if you have multiple schedules like I have, you'll want to go ahead and update all your schedules and add that in there. All right, might be a good time to refresh any shift rates that are in there, make sure that those are correct so that you have that information in there. Tax rates, you shouldn't need to do anything in here unless you are doing something with the forms. So you'll see here I have a form for 2023 TD1, which I obviously should have updated this year. So if you are, having the form related to a tax rate, you'll want to come in here and select the right one. So 2025 TD1 as an example to make sure that it's linked to the right form. Right, possibly workers' comp codes need to be updated. So you'd go into your workers' comp and put in your rates for next year, depending on how that is working for you out there. If you're using our system to calculate workers' comp, so that's in there. You may have things in certified rates if you're doing union stuff and there are union changes. There's a lot of things that could be changed. I'm not going to go into all of them because obviously we'd be here for a while. One other thing that may change, depending on how you have your system configured, stuff in benefits. They may have benefit plans that expire at the end of the year, end of the calendar year. You may want to refresh those, make sure the rates are correct. That's a different webinar where we talk about benefits. So I'm not going to go into the detail on that. Okay, recruiting and scheduling and these other things don't really apply to what we're doing today. So I'm not going to really talk about any of these other things out here. One that you may need to do is if you do have any forms, like I mentioned the TD1 where I've got it 2023, want to make sure you get the latest one in there. So, upload that 2025 form so you can do that right in here. Okay. Possibly something has changed on your T4 or our ROE settings. That sometimes happens where you've got maybe a new person taking over payroll and you've never updated that. Or you just want to check your information. You can assign this form to an administrator to complete that form and fill in that information. So it might be a good idea to review this. It's not something you can click on here and review. You have to assign it to somebody for them to do that so they can fill out that information. They do that in documents. Right, I do want to talk a little bit about document delivery because you may want to deliver your tax forms by, your T4s by self-service and or email. So you'll need to do that in your document delivery. The first thing is if you are going to save it into self-service, you'll need to make a folder for that under documents. You'll need to make a folder in here where you'll do this. So you can add a folder and you could call this, like tax forms or something like that and make that folder right there. Okay, and then you can now use that in your document delivery. So this is where you could publish out your T4s out there. So you'll see this one, the name doesn't really matter. You don't have to put like the year in there. You can just call it T4 or tax forms or something, but you can create these. And I'll show you how you create it from scratch if you don't have one. So you call it like T4, right? Description is not required. Here's the report you want to use. You'll see some US things in here like ACA. Don't worry about that. But here's T4. And of course, you may be doing the other ones. And then how are you going to distribute them? So these options over here determine how you're going to be sending this out to the employee. So first off, it does need to be active to be used. So you want to check that. But then are you using this? Is this your way of doing it in self-service? Maybe you have a different thing you want to do for email. I'm not sure why you do it separately, but you can do that. Right. If you do post it in self-service, it's going to ask for the path, which is that folder I just created. So you go and select that folder that you just created, or if you already had one, of course, you can double check it, but that's the folder it's going to use. Now, this setting here would say to use the personal email address rather than the primary email address for sending by email. If the personal is empty, it will go back to the primary. It won't just not send it. So that is right there if you want to do that. All right, and then you would just save this to do that out there. All right, I did want to mention, I should double check, maybe Connor or Patrick know this, that we have a new setting in preferences that you can do electronic tax delivery. I know it works for the US. Don't know if it works for Canadian ones. So maybe Patrick or Connor, if you happen to know, or you can look for that for me and let me know about that. This allows the employees to opt into only paperless delivery. They're not going to get a paper copy. let's just double check. I should have looked and see if that applies to the US only or Canada as well. But back to this here, document delivery. I believe the personal email setting, I saw that question out there from Candace, is a new setting. So if you don't already have that configured, you can go in there and check that. All right, so that would be the document delivery. And it's always a good time to check things that you might need to double check out here. For an example, you might want to double check that your notifications are turned on to let people know that a document has been delivered to them. So if you are using a document delivery, there is a notification layout for that. So I forget what it's called, but maybe it's called document delivery. Yes. So you will want to make sure that these are turned on if you want people to know about those. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in here. Nope, nothing else I could think of, unless Patrick or Goddard could think of something I'm missing. Maybe your overtime rules, just double check those. They probably aren't going to change where you're going to calculate overtime differently in the new year, but it's certainly possible where you're going to do that. So let's look at some of the reports you can use to make sure everything is correct on your payroll. Now, what you're going to want to do, of course, is finish all your payrolls for the year. So, you could go in here certainly and run these reports today and even look at your tax forms, your T4 and stuff. But of course, you're not going to have, a month's worth of payroll in there. So you'll have to do it again towards the end of the year. But if you want to just get some practice in, you can run some of these reports to make sure that they are correct. So some of these ones you want to see out here, you'll see, income totals and deduction totals. You may want to look at those. So, to make sure that things are correct, you can run these reports. Just to, give you an idea, this one here, income totals, is just going to be just the incomes. We're not looking at any employee detail in here. So if you're trying to look at individual employee tax returns, this is not going to be the report for you. But if you want to look like the total regular pay and overtime or whatever your income codes are for the year or period of time that you're looking at, this one might be useful for that. Of course, you would do, depending on if it's December or January, current year or previous year. As I mentioned, of course, you want to make sure all your payrolls are done. So if you do have some type of thing you've been sitting on all year long, you just need to record it for tax purposes or something, make sure you do that before you run your reports. Otherwise, you might not expect, things might not balance out if you don't run them all nearly the same time with everything done you need to do for 2024. So you'd run this, let's say it was January, make sure you select previous year. You can see the dates. I could do a custom range, just type it in if I want to, or use the calendar. And for these, because you're looking at, comparing it for like tax forms for the year, you probably don't want to break it down by, cost center or division or something like that, just because, if you're trying to compare it to all the tax forms and you just run one division, things aren't going to work out right. All right, so you could run this report as an example. So it doesn't take too long. But I do apologize about all these custom reports I have in here. You probably don't have all these. Some of you may have them. I've loaded in a lot of those custom reports that we use for some of our clients. So you'll see them in my system here. While this is running, let me just talk about the deduction ones. So deductions, similar ones. This is going to be the total deductions, which might be useful if you don't want to look at like all of your RRSP deductions. You don't care about the individual employees. This one might be here, but let's look at this one here, which is the deduction total by employee. So this one, you may want to run it for a particular deduction. You might say like current year, and you want to run it for just one deduction or something like that. Let's just say that RRSP, you want to run that. And of course, I'm doing current year because it is still 24. And then I can, I'm not going to show, or filter down, but I'll go ahead and run this report here. While that one's running, let's see if this one's done. It's not. Not sure why it's taking so long. I'm not going to sit here and wait for reports to run, but this will allow me to look at just that one deduction, but now it's going to have each employee and it will say, Bob Jones and how much he's taken out and Sally Jane or whatever. So you can see the individual employees with their employee numbers. Let me just zoom into the numbers here. You can see there's your income, employee amount, employee year to date, which if I'm running it for year to date, it should match up. And then you'll see the employer amount and employer year to date. So you can see that information there. And this is by employee. So when you're looking at their tax forms, you can double check that everything's there. Don't worry about these names, are all made up. These aren't real people. All right, so just an example of that report. Of course, I might want to run it for several deductions. This will group it up by deduction code. So if I do select more than one deduction in the options, it would say like RRSP, and then, whatever the next one I selected alphabetically. So if I selected this one, it's gonna, put those in there, and they'll be separate. Okay, so just an example of that. And then there, of course, are tax reports that you may want to run as well. So very similar reports down here. This will be the totals. So it'll just have like, the federal tax and the provincial tax and stuff for, the totals. And I'll just run this one. Just to get you an idea. Mine might have several provinces because for demo purposes, I use this one across multiple provinces. You may not have that. Maybe you are. If you're not just all in one province, yours might look something like mine. I don't think I have any US payroll mixed in here anymore. This is just Canadian, but that'll do that. Let's see, here's the income one, just so you can see this one is totaling by the income code. So you can kind of see how that's right there. Right, and here you see, okay, looks like it was just in Quebec for this one. So I've got my different tax codes here with the totals. Obviously, if I was looking at individual employees, I wanted to do that. This one would break it out. This would be by tax code and then employees. This is by employees and then tax code. So depending on how you're looking at that. Right, so those are the reports you probably want to run. Now, there are other reports that you could run to look at other stuff. Perhaps you wanted to see like, the payroll summary by employee, which kind of puts everything in one per employee thing. That might be useful information. All the reports are reading from the same source of data. It's just different views of looking at that data. Obviously, I'm looking at specific tax codes here, no incomes or deductions. And then that income one obviously is just income, but it's all from the same place. So if I run, let's say, this payroll summary by employee, and Canada FWT will be on there, I'll be able to see the total taxes. It'll match up because it's all from the same source of data. All right, let's go down to the tax filing, and we'll talk about running your T4s. All right. So your CRA business number, employee, what year are you running? You should see 24 in there by now, because I could see it. So it should be in yours. You want to put a box 82 total in there. If you want to run it for like one employee or some employees, you'll see some examples here. I want to run it for, a few employees. I could check those off. Maybe as a group of employees I wanted to run it for, everybody in a certain facility or something. I might use my employee groups for that. And I'll just go ahead and apply this here. Now, here is the delivery. This is where that publishing would come in. So you'll see that icon right up there because I have my document delivery turned on. Okay, and this will run the report there that you can do this. Now, one thing you may want to do is perhaps you have some data grids that give you this information in a format that you like. Of course, you can run those reports. Again, all of the reports are looking at the same source of data. It's just perhaps different views of it that you've come accustomed to. So you may have a data grid out there that will help you out that either you've created or we've created with you to report on that information. And while this is running, I know there was some Q&A here. Yeah, as far as updating the TD1, I don't believe it's changed for 25. I haven't seen the 25 one. I know the 24 one was exactly the same as 23, which is why I didn't change it. Just the year changed. So I don't think there's a way to just replace the background image on the PDF there. Maybe if you just had like a JPEG version of that, you could put it in there and make it go to the back. That might work. I could try that out in my forms and we can let you know, Lacey, if that would work, because I don't believe anything's changed on the form itself besides the year. I haven't seen the 25. I know the 24 didn't change. And here's some examples of the T4. Now, of course, I'm not worried about this, the actual data on here, because it's just made up stuff. So don't worry that I'm giving somebody's data away. But you'll see here, this is going to be a lot of employees. I have a pretty big employee set in my demo here, so it does take a little bit longer to run. Obviously, if you have, and the number of employees that I have, or more, it's going to probably take a little bit longer to run. But if you have less, I think I have like 600 employees or something like that, or maybe maybe a few more. But so it does take a little bit to run, and I'm waiting for it to come up. Here you'll see the delivery. While this is coming, I'm going to talk about the delivery here. So this is where you can publish that. Now, I'm not sure if Patrick or Connor were able to look it up, but the publishing here, this would push it to self-service, and obviously email if I had the email turned on, and then this will print the paper copies. So that's how you can do that. Now there will be, if I'm not mistaken, also an option here to download this and also print directly from the viewer. So I could do that right here without having to go to print paper copies. And I'm just waiting here. Hopefully this will finish here. It's at the end. Maybe I should have queued this up already, but I don't have to sit here and talk while it's going. Here we go. So what, of course, you're going to want to check is, your address shouldn't have changed. If possible that it changed. Maybe you moved your headquarters and you didn't do this. This would be in the primary work location for the company. So if this is not correct, you'll want to make sure that is correct. There, obviously, your company name, your CRA, and everything. You want to make sure that is right. But here you can see an example of the T4. Now, these are the numbers that you might match up to those income and deduction and tax reports. So, your employment income and the taxes withheld and everything like that. So you can see that. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is where things land in the different boxes. Let me go back to that real quick there in the deductions. If you need something to show up in a particular box here and it's not showing up correctly, perhaps, something needs to show up over here and it's not, what you can do is go to the deduction and there'll be a system label that you can use to make sure it shows up in the correct one. You may have seen that there, and I apologize I didn't do it. Here you see T4 box 20. So these are the system labels to make sure that it shows up in the correct box. If it's not, if you're not seeing something, or maybe it's showing up in box 52 and it should be in 20 or something, that's how you would fix that. So I apologize about missing that introduction setup, but that's where that comes into play right there. And I'm not sure if anybody on the call is First Nations, but we do have a setting on the employees where you can indicate that they are. Don't know if I have this set up in my system, but in the additional demographics, we have a system label right here that you can, I think I have it set up. You can indicate that they're First Nations or status. I don't have it set up, but if they are a status employee, your First Nation, and they're a status employee, this system label is what you would use for that. All right, but here you can see the T4 and what it looks like. You're probably familiar with how this looks. Of course, if the employee's address is wrong, you go back and fix that on the employee, or maybe they would submit that change to you through self-service. You can, if you hit this print thing, it would print everything here. So all 502 pages. I thought I had a little bit more, but 502 pages. Of course, I could download this to a PDF. But if you do want to use the actual publishing, this is where you do this. This would push it out to self-service so that when Derek logged in, you'd be able to see this in his self-service, be able to see this here. Or if I did have the email option turned on, it would email him and publish the self-service depending on my options there. All right, so that is pretty much as far as I want to go. Obviously, we could do the T4A, the T4A NR if you want to do those. Very similar to running them. I'm not going to go ahead and run them, but you could do that here for that. If you need to do the T4A or the T4A NR, it's similar steps you would go through here. Same thing with the RL1. If you have to do the RL1, that is right here, where you could fill that information in and run the RL1. I don't think I need to show you all how to run a report. The RL1 can be published, so that would be in your document delivery, where you can do that for those reports there. So I know that I believe we answered all the questions. I know there was a question about benefits rollover. That is, we do have a separate webinar. We talked about benefits. I don't remember exactly when that is, but on our YouTube channel, we have that video out there. I do want to actually, what I can do is talk about just very briefly how that works there. Where's my my browser went away? Oh, here it is. You would need an enrollment to have it roll over from one year to the next if you do that. So you can set up an enrollment to automatically roll over. So you'll see I have this one here, like plan rollover. So in the enrollment, you can go through, and in this right here is where you can tell it to roll over, let's say your long-term disability to a long-term disability. So that is in the auto rollover where you would do that. So you just go forward. Here are the different plans you might have in there. And then in the auto rollover is where you do this. You say, okay, this plan that is called extended healthcare is going to roll over into extended healthcare, but it needs to be configured. Whatever options exist under the benefit plan, you need to configure those. That's what this green check mark is. All right, so you can see here as an example, the old and the new value. So that one doesn't have any setup, but this one might. It might have like an amount of coverage or something in there. So you do need to go through each one, make sure they're all green checked, every plan that you are including in there. That will do the auto rollover for you from one year to the next if you're doing it on a calendar year, or any time really. If it happens to be in May, same type of thing. All right, let's look real quick at our schedule of events. So in 2 weeks, you all can probably take a little break because we're doing another payroll year end for the US. So you're welcome to join if you want to learn about the US, but not going to be really relevant for most people. If you want to refresh on this stuff and go over it again, in 4 weeks, we're going to be covering this same topic, same workflow, everything, the same flow here on the 19th. And then we're going to go into the next year, obviously, in 2025. First one we're going to be covering, which you may be interested in, is our new mobile app. It's actually been out for a few weeks now, and you're welcome to download that from the App Store, but we're going to cover the functionality that is within the mobile app. So we'll talk about that. And then, unfortunately, another US specific one, which is the Affordable Care Act reporting. We're going to cover that in January 23rd. So that is our next 4 that are out here. I actually have planning out through the end of March, but these are the next 4. I don't want to flood the zone here with too many things. So thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate that. I believe we answered all those questions. If not, Patrick or Connor or myself will make sure they'll get answered. And if you do have any other additional questions, please reach out to us, help@criterionhcm.com. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a nice day.